Hello, welcome to Alliance on the Move. Whether you're viewing us on the Burbies Channel 8 television, Dave's TV, or you're picking us up online, thank you for allowing us your time to have this discussion. And tonight we're going to be having a very important discussion. As I think all Guyanese are aware, whether you're at home in Guyana or abroad, I'm sure you are aware that in a matter of hours, December 3rd, Venezuela head to the polls on a referendum. In a nutshell, the referendum seeks to annex our Essequibo region, which Venezuela has claimed for decades. To discuss this, I have the most eminent attorney at law, Nigel Hughes. Nigel, welcome and thank you for your time. And
Beverly,
I have Ricky Ramsuru, the vice chair of the Alliance for Change. Unfortunately, our leader, Kemra Dramchitan, who so wanted to be part of this discussion, cannot make it. He's trapped in traffic. But if I'm to give a very brief chronology of what has been happening of very recent, on May 26, 2015, Venezuela issued Decree number 1.787, which basically declared an area it regarded as its maritime space. And in that decree, it also authorized the Venezuelan Navy to basically carry out their activities within the area and to secure that area. At that time, ExxonMobil vessel Deepwater Champion was in that area that the Venezuelan decree had now demarcated. Um, I think it is that action by the Venezuelan government that prompted the coalition government at the time, the acting AFC government, to seek a final binding solution to this border controversy. And so the coalition government applied to the ICJ. Um, there was the whole issue of Venezuela not wanting to recognize the court and all of that. But recall that this happened shortly after ExxonMobil had made the discovery of commercially viable quantities of crude offshore Guyana. So that is also a factor that we need to consider in this discussion. And it happened at a time when Venezuela's economy was on the decline and the commercial quantities of oil discovered offshore Guyana signaled Guyana's prosperity. So in March 2018, Guyana instituted those legal proceedings at the ICJ to settle the border controversy. Now let us fast forward to this year, 2023, where on October 23rd, the government of Venezuela published a list of 5 questions, right, that it would put to a referendum to its people. And that referendum, those questions, in a nutshell, I would say, seeks to annex Essequibo region to Venezuela and to issue Guyanese living within the region there Essequibo Venezuelan citizenship. So it's all about annexing, taking control of that region of ours. Again, Guyana went to the ICJ and brought that matter, I think, on October 30th for some provisional measures. And Attorney at Law Nigel Hughes will take us through that and explain that in detail. And quite recently, December 1st, the ICJ handed down its ruling. And so, Nigel, if I can start with you, what, yes, thank you. What were the measures that Guyana was seeking when it applied to the court recently, October the 23rd?
sure. First of all,
October, sorry.
good night, Beverly. Thank you for your usual gracious comments, which are always inaccurate and excessive. But be that as it may, thank you, Ricky. Good night. Perhaps in answering that question, I wonder if I can perhaps be allowed, with your permission, to go into a little bit more detail of the history of this dispute, so that we
Please.
we get a full understanding of why we are at where we are at. Back in the late 1800s, when Venezuela was independent and Guyana was still a colony of the British, there was always a difficulty over the area that was between the Orinoco River and the Essequibo River. British Guyana, sorry, I should say England, or the United Kingdom and Venezuela had a big dispute over that area. It's a huge trading area, and it's one of the original trading areas where the Dutch were, the Spanish, Venezuela became independent. They agreed to go to a final arbitral solution in 1899 because this problem had been there. And that's a large territory between the Orinoco River and the Essequibo. What happened was the arbitral body sat in 1899 and pronounced a final boundary, which is the existing boundary between Guyana and
Right.
Venezuela. It is important to recall that the Venezuelans were very happy because what the arbitral committee also determined was that the Orinoco was Venezuelan. And the Venezuelans were very happy that they had got the Orinoco, and they thought that this was a very progressive decision. They actually kept the Orinoco because they were at risk of losing the Orinoco. Guyana could actually have gone all the way to the Orinoco River. So they were very happy with the settlement, and as a consequence of that settlement, they had to set up boundary commissions so that they could have a final demarcation of the boundary, the physical land boundary
Yeah.
between Guyana and Venezuela, then British Guyana. That was done in 1900 and 1904. The decision of that arbitral committee was accepted as final, both by the British, British, Venezuelans, and of course the Americans. The judges who sat on the arbitral tribunal, one was Russian, I think American, but that is irrelevant. Fast forward to 1966.
Uh-huh.
After having accepted this boundary as final,
Yes.
Venezuela raised the issue about the border being final, and they raised this on memoirs, posthumous memoirs of their representative who was at the arbitral tribunal. And in 1966, actually February the 17th, we signed an agreement in which we would resolve, and this is important, the controversy, not resolve the border
The
dispute. We
border
accepted that the border was final
was
and had been
marked.
determined.
Uh-huh.
Venezuela raised this issue about coercive powers and the ambassador being purloined. And so they signed an agreement to resolve the controversy, set up good officers, um, and all the necessaries. That process did not work. And as you rightly said, when after the discovery of oil, while Exxon was exploring, um, Venezuela sent its warships into the offshore, the maritime boundaries, in an attempt to interfere with the exploratory works that were being done by Venezuela. But sorry, by Exxon. At that time, the government decided that, and that's the APNU government, as you rightly said, that it would submit this controversy to the International Court of Justice for its final determination, not of the arbitral award, but its determination of the controversy that had arisen. So Guyana was not asking the ICJ to determine the boundary, it was asking the ICJ to pronounce on the finality, the perfection, and the fact that in 1899, where it identified where the boundary was, that was the final and acceptable location. When we submitted this matter to the ICJ in 2015, what happened was the first point Venezuela made was that the ICJ had no jurisdiction to
Uh-huh.
hear this application by Guyana to determine the controversy. That's the first point they made. The ICJ found, I think it was in October of that year, that it had jurisdiction. Just so that people understand what jurisdiction means, is that if you were to sue me in Thailand about a dispute we had over a piece of land in Guyana, and the Thai court started to hear this dispute, I can go to Thailand and say to the Thai court, dear judge, you can't hear this matter because it relates to land in Guyana. So the Thai court doesn't have jurisdiction because this relates to land in Guyana, even though we might be two Guyanese citizens. And so that's what jurisdiction essentially is. It's whether the court has the authority to pronounce upon the dispute between the parties. So Venezuela's first position when this matter was taken to the ICJ by Guyana back in 2015 was that the court doesn't have jurisdiction. The ICJ found that it had jurisdiction. In other words, it could hear the parties on this controversy that had arisen as a result of the 1966 agreement that they had called the Geneva Agreement on the 17th of February, which they had signed between them. So they took submissions um, from Guyana. Venezuela didn't want to submit for a long time. They eventually made their submissions, and the case has been put down for a final ruling. That's the most important thing we need to understand. This case has not been determined. There is nothing that has taken place at the ICJ that has determined what the final position of the court is. So we all need to understand that there has been no determination of the issue in relation to the controversy that started in 1966.
I
So,
think that that's a point that needs to be repeated.
okay, so no decision whatsoever has been made by the ICJ, the International Court of Justice, in relation to the controversy that arose as a result of the Geneva Agreement of the 17th of February 1966. So we need to bear that in mind. So what
Yeah,
has happened, we need to keep it in mind for several reasons. This is the decision of the ICJ recently, and I'll come to that chronologically in a minute, is good for Guyana, but it doesn't change anything that is material to the dispute. They have not given any indication of whether they're going to find in Guyana's favor that the controversy is settled in Guyana's favor, or that it is settled in Barbados is in Venezuela's favor. So there's no indication. So there's nothing there for us to get excited about. I want to make that clear. That's the bottom line. Nothing to get excited about in relation to the decision that will ultimately come. What happened?
that is the matter that was brought that we took in 2018 to the
Right.
court.
It was 2018. Sorry, I might have been saying 2015. Sorry about that. 2018 that you took to the court. Right. Now, what happened is this. In Venezuela, the National Electoral Council of Venezuela published a series of 5 questions that it was going to put to the electorate, which would authorize the government of Venezuela to proceed to take over Essequibo. Remember all the time, remember the first point Venezuela made was that the ICJ had no jurisdiction. So they didn't accept that ruling from the ICJ, but it is not them to accept it. Once you're a signatory to that treaty and to the process, you
It's
submit to
binding.
whatever the ruling of the court is. So they then came up with 5 questions, and 3 of those 5 questions directly impinged upon the issues which the ICJ had to determine, but more perniciously, they were intended to authorize the government of Venezuela to take over the county of Essequibo. And for the benefit of your viewers, I will just read those 5 questions. The most
Please
important
go
are
right
the
ahead.
first, the third, and the fifth questions. Those are the most important questions. And the first question was, and this is put by the National Electoral Council of Venezuela. First question was to announce to the Venezuelan people whose sovereignty is inalienable in accordance with Article 5 of the Constitution of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. The question to be asked in the consultative referendum in defense of Guyana Essequibo. so that the will of the people may be expressed on the 3rd of December. Those questions are as follows. One, do you agree to reject by all means, in accordance with law, the line fraudulently imposed by the 1899 Paris Arbitral Award, thus seeks to dispossess us of our Guyana Essequibo? Very controversial. Not even controversial, that is very clear. They're saying here that the Venezuelan Republic must, in accordance with their constitution, reject the 1899 Paris Arbitral Award in which Venezuela was dispossessed. The
Will
second
reject
question,
the border.
to reject that arbitral award from 1899. That was their first question. So it was clear then that by that question, they were not waiting for the ICJ to make a determination on the issue of whether or not the controversy that arose in 1966 as a result of our Geneva Agreement. They were saying, forget the ICJ. The 1899 award was bad. We don't recognize it. And
Null
we
and void.
must take all means. Very important. Second
Those words
question,
are very serious words.
very serious and of significant importance.
Enemy,
Sec-
yeah.
Second question was, do you support the 1966 Geneva Agreement as the only valid legal instrument to reach a practical and satisfactory solution for Venezuela and Guyana to their dispute over the Guyana Essequibo territory? Not as pernicious in its impact, because it's just asking, do you support the Geneva Agreement from 1966? Because remember that Geneva Agreement said that a controversy was created. Third question, problematic again. Do you agree with Venezuela's historic position of not recognizing the jurisdiction of the International Court of Justice to resolve the territorial dispute over Guyana Essequibo? That is literally saying to the people, we don't recognize the ICJ. We don't care whatever the ICJ says.
Mhm.
Ultimately, we are saying, can you tell us whether you recognize Venezuela's position of not recognizing the 1899 award and the ICJ's jurisdiction? So, in other words, the court to which Venezuela went to argue had no jurisdiction. The same court that's found that they had jurisdiction, Venezuela is saying before that court makes any finding that we do not, it's asking the people to say, we don't
We do not
recognize the court.
recognize that.
That
Whatever
is
they
that
say,
is a
we're not going to bother with it.
that is a clear shot at the ICJ having any jurisdiction. In other words, it's saying to the ICJ, we don't recognize your jurisdiction, and it's asking the people of Venezuela to authorize the government not to recognize the jurisdiction. Fourth question, not as difficult. Do you agree to propose by all means, in accordance with the law, Guyana's claim to unilaterally have its disposal a sea yet to be delimited illegally and in violation of international law, which is the international maritime boundary? So they're saying, do you oppose the Guyana position in that? And the fifth question, which is perhaps the most um, far reaching in impact, that is most pernicious for Guyana, is this: do you agree with the creation of a Guyana Essequibo state and that an accelerated and comprehensive plan be developed to present the present and future population of that territory, including, inter alia, the granting of Venezuelan citizenship and identity cards in accordance with the Geneva Agreement and international law, consequently incorporating the state into the map of
Okay.
Venezuelan territory? That is literally saying that Venezuela is going to create this state of Guyana Essequibo, spelled differently, of course, and you have to vote to authorize, to say that you support the creation of this state. And then, after that state is created, citizenship will be given to all the occupants of that state, which is Essequibo, citizenship in Venezuela, and identity cards. So, in other words, this becomes a region of
Venezuela.
Venezuela, and it is in effect the takeover. It is
Yeah.
the annexation of that. Now, when they announced the referendum for that, Guyana immediately went into action and said to the court, one, You have found that you have jurisdiction to hear this dispute. And since you have jurisdiction to hear this dispute, you also have the power to issue what are called interim measures in order to protect the status quo. Now, in civil law, and people like to talk a lot about injunctions, if two parties have a dispute, we have a dispute over a boundary, and you decide while the court is hearing this matter that you want to come and take over this territory while the court is hearing the dispute, you have the right to go to the court for an injunction to say to the parties, not that we have determined this issue, but while we are determining this issue, hold your horses, don't change the status quo. And that is precisely what Guyana did when it went to the ICJ in October to say, look, while you are hearing this matter, Venezuela has asked its citizens to vote on measures that will allow it to take over the Essequibo physically before you have determined the issue that we raised in 1966. And we said, amongst other things, that we need protection. You need to issue an order to restrain, you need to restrain Venezuela from taking any action. So the court said, first of all, because we found we had jurisdiction, we can decide whether or not we can issue an interim protective order. They said, secondly, in order to get the protective order, you have to show, one, that your case is plausible. And they found that Guyana had a plausible case because there was a final settlement in 1899 and it had engaged the intention of the court. And secondly, you had to establish that there's a link between what you say is the threat and the dispute that is before the court. And they found that that there was such a link. And so after having done that, they issued certain orders. Um, they found also that there was a risk of irreparable harm to Guyana because if Venezuela, in effect, took over
Yeah.
Essequibo, then that's a real risk. Now, what they said that a lot of people got concerned about was that they used the term Guyana exercise control over the area as opposed to saying Guyana exercise sovereignty. And we could probably discuss that later. But as a consequence, what they said was that both countries should resist from any action, from taking any action that is likely to affect the matter that is before the
Financing.
court. You
Yeah.
shouldn't take any action.
Basically,
They
make it more complicated.
exactly. They found that there were strong tensions between the parties, and the
Yes.
fact that Venezuela had expressed its readiness to take physical action in relation to the dispute, that was clearly an intention that needed to be addressed urgently, and said that it should not take any such action. One of the things Guyana had asked for that we didn't get was Guyana had said, "Look, can you stop Venezuela from having this referendum at all?"
Right.
Now, there's a principle in international law that every country is responsible for its national affairs. And therefore, if a country wants to have a referendum, in theory, it'd be allowed to have it. And Guyana said that asked the ICJ to stop the referendum. The ICJ didn't go that far.
No.
They said, look, we've established that there's a real danger. We've established that the utterances of the president of Venezuela, the minister of defense, and various other persons are threats to Guyana, and consequently, nothing should be done. And that is where we're at. Now, because Venezuela um, will go ahead with the referendum tomorrow, the reason we are in the position
Yes.
where both sides are claiming a victory, we have got a definitive statement from the ICJ saying the actions of Venezuela have presented a clear danger to Guyana. They are a threat to the issues that are before the court, and therefore nothing further should be done. And we are celebrating that. Venezuela, um, who are embarrassed by this decision, quite frankly, need to spin it. And the way they're spinning it is that the court has not given Guyana what it asked for, which is not to
The
prohibit
referendum.
them from holding the referendum. So they're saying, look, the ICJ has not stopped us from holding the referendum. But the reality is the ICJ has found that those three questions, 1, 3, and 5, are a direct threat to Guyana. They're a direct threat to the proceedings before the ICJ, and Venezuela should not proceed with the actions contemplated by those three questions. So Venezuela is saying, look, they didn't stop the referendum, we're going to have it. But that presents Guyana and presents everybody with the next problem, which is after the referendum tomorrow,
What?
what exactly is going to happen? Now,
Exactly.
Venezuela, I don't think is going to want to act contrary to what is the clear directions of the ICJ, but they have a political issue because one of those questions in the referendum is whether or not they should not recognize the ICJ. So if the people vote tomorrow not to recognize the ICJ, and the ICJ has already pronounced by its interim measures that that question
Has jurisdiction.
directly, one, it has jurisdiction, and two, that question directly is a threat to the determination of the issues that they have jurisdiction over. What is going to happen? That is a real issue because the Venezuelans are saying, look, the ICJ did not stop the referendum. So, in other words, they're going to say, since you didn't stop the referendum, we were entitled to put that question about whether we should recognize the ICJ to our people. And if the Venezuelan people vote tomorrow not to recognize the ICJ, we have to deal with that issue. I know I've spoken for a long time, but that is
No,
perhaps
this is very interesting because this is not the first bout of saber rattling on our western borders. With Venezuela, we maintain very peaceful relations with Brazil, but every now and again we have this border controversy coming to the fore with Venezuela. So tomorrow they head to the referendum, and you brought us exactly to the point where I want us to continue and probably to bring in Ricky here. This has caused, this whole situation has caused Guyanese much concern. Should we be take comfort in the ruling of the ICJ? What real comfort is there for the people of Guyana? Is there anything sort of binding that would prevent what a lot of Guyanese fear, that there is an influx of Venezuelan nationals, that there's an incursion of the Venezuelan military? Is there any comfort in the ruling for us? Ricky, I really want to bring you into the conversation at this time from a layman's perspective, a man in the street perspective, and especially someone who you would have been operating your business within that area that Venezuela is now claiming. How are people on the ground feeling? How should they be feeling?
have we lost Ricky? I'm not sure. I see him moving, but I'm not
Ricky,
sure whether
I don't know what's happening there with Ricky.
he's speaking, but he's muted
He's
now.
speaking, but Vicky, can you unmute your mic? I don't know what's happening there. But Nigel, while we sort out what's happening with Ricky, I'll have Sherrod at the back end talk to Ricky and see how we can sort that out. Um, is
Sure.
there comfort for the Guyanese people here,
Okay.
Nigel?
All right. There's comfort at one level. If I create a situation in which I create a sense of fear in you, and because of my superior military position, you become very concerned that you will be subject to harm, you will become very worried. So I've created a fear in you. That fear has been assuaged to a certain extent by the interim decision of the ICJ. So the ICJ has said very clearly that what is being contemplated by Venezuela is not permissible. Now, the question is going to be, you see, if they had decided not to go ahead with the referendum, that would have been one thing. Having gone ahead with the referendum, you have two levels. One is at the practical level. What is the political consequence for Maduro if he goes ahead and he gets an overwhelming vote in support of question 3, which is that Venezuela should not recognize the ICJ? And so, if he gets that mandate, what is he going to do? If the people of Venezuela say to him, do not recognize the ICJ, he's going to look politically weak if he says, well, let's wait for the ICJ to make a decision. So the next concern we have, I think, as Guyanese is what actions is he going to take? Now, I don't believe Venezuela has at the moment the financial resources to sustain, not to begin, they could begin an invasion, but I don't think they have the financial resources to sustain a long-term occupation. And I don't think that's where they were heading. But there are many other activities that they can undertake. I think we have Ricky back. So I don't know if he's hearing us. You could
Yeah,
perhaps.
actually, sorry
We
guys,
hear you. That's the thing.
my apology. I was getting some static on the computer, so I had to switch my phone. I don't know what's happening with the internet. You know, these
Glad
things
to
are not
have you back.
updated. Bev, you were asking me about it. I guess you were asking me about the local
Yeah,
feelings about
the sentiments on the ground, the fears, the concern.
yeah. So first of all, I really wanted to say I'm very honored to be with my former chairman of the party, Mr. Nigel Huge,
The learned attorney.
attorney. And I wanted to say good evening to all our viewers across Guyana. And I know you guys are looking forward. I want to put it to Mr. Huge, a very nice summary as to where we came from and where we are right now. I want to say thank you very much for that because a lot of people are pretty much clear about the issue. But Guyanese here are still worried because I think it's first time. It's been happening over the period of time since I know Venezuela. Every time it comes close to election, and they always put this Essequibo region, this controversy, as one of the political tools to garner support in their country. So our Guyanese people now, because they were moving military close to the borderline, is what got a lot of people, shivering a bit. The government take a very slow process of educating and probably informing the people of what was really happening in Guyana until the opposition, we had to come and pushing them to do a lot of things. And some of the things that we wanted to, we went to parliament together and we joined and we told them that we are going to be side by side with them, united with this controversy that is happening here in with Venezuela and Guyana. But we still find that many of the program that they're doing, they're not inclusive the opposition as they should, and it's kind of like triggered personally for myself. I'm not happy the way that they're handling the situation, and until we have to keep pushing about the education program. Now we see that they're going back, putting back a lot of the programs that we had before in school. I guess Nigel and myself, we born in the 70s. I born in the 70s, so we know.
I wish
School.
I was
Young,
born in the
young man
60s.
Nigel.
I was born in the 60s, my friend.
70s,
Early 60s as well.
Guyana, the beautiful Guyana. 23 years of 1992, the killers come down right down the line because, and this is where politicians are very dangerous. And sometimes as a young politician, I really don't want to go into that boat because I prefer to deal with issue rather than my personal feelings into politics. So the Guyanese people, Bev, is at a period of time, even now, my phone is like ringing every day. There's a message coming in, tired of answering. What are we gonna do? What is gonna happen? But I'm the because I am mostly following the geopolitics because that's where my interest lies. And that can get you a bit scary when you don't see that level of influences coming. So and that brings me to recently, to compound this matter here in Guyana, the president went to Dubai. I mean, that was a shockwave to me because he's the commander in chief. This matter of climate change here is Barajak Dave. The vice president knows it pretty much well. The Ministry of Natural Resources, Vikram Bharat, knows the issue, and they have somebody who is inclined to deal with this matter, which is Pradeep Bolanat, that works at the Ministry of Natural Resources, that are so inclined. They could have dealt with this matter, but the commander in chief should have remained in Guyana. We understand maybe it's a good defense to say, okay, maybe he's talking to other heads of government, but that was not the place. You had to be staying here. You had to be constantly talking to the people of Guyana. They want to hear from you what is you are doing and what is happening, and keep us abreast of what's happening and how you're dealing geopolitically is one, but how you're dealing with locally. Are you, ensuring that our army and everything and so on is being well kept abreast? We have see because social media is keeping this very negative, and that is where people are very inclined to the social media was happening. A lot of vigilance going around. Um, that's talking about the negative about what's going to happen. People, you know, the forestry sector, the gold sector, there was no meeting yet as to what are those loggers and what those miners were supposed to be doing. So there was no proper preparation from the government side as to really to deal with this issue. And we have to because the people are scared and they're very fearful of an attack, so to speak, which is a military invasion or so on, to Guyana. So we have to be preparing to ensure to counteract that aspect of it. And so on the ground right now, Bev, I know tomorrow we have what we call uh, patriotic concert. I don't know what is patriotic when I'm going to leave my people and go to another country and come back. I don't know the patriotism. I want to have black here as a
Beverly,
politician.
I wonder if I can ask Ricky one question,
Please
because
go ahead, Angel.
this patriotic concert that they're having tomorrow, which I'm assuming is going to be an opportunity for the political class of the country to show their unity. Is there any reason why they haven't held it in Essequibo? Why are they holding it in Georgetown?
Nigel, Nigel,
I'm
Nigel.
just curious. I mean,
No,
it strikes me. It
so many
strikes
people
me. It's either you hold it at Kriviton, the furthest place possible from Essequibo, or you hold it
Put
in
it in
Kaituma,
there,
or you
to
go
show
to the Waini River.
solidarity.
I mean, if you want to be patriotic and display some leadership collectively, I think you should hold it in the county which is in dispute.
absolutely, and that's why we are now going to be going to Linden because Linden has arranged a rally, right? When Linden has been arranged a rally because Linden is really the gateway for those areas like Region 1, 9, 10,
Yeah,
and so on.
but the
So
point, Ricky, is to me,
seven,
and you just raised it. Forgive me for cutting you.
sure.
If the people who are concerned about whatever Venezuela is going to do are in Essequibo, they're
Mhm.
the people, the loggers, the miners, etc., then to me, the greatest demonstration of patriotism collectively by the political class,
Should
yourself,
be
Beverly, should
closest.
be in the territory that is in dispute. Show some courage, show some support, demonstrate to the people who are in imminent danger, if you want to say it's imminent, that you are brave enough to go there and hold a concert. What is the point of holding a concert in Georgetown, which is not under threat? Is there's no adverse claim, and the people from the region of Essequibo who are under threat will not even get it on Zoom or get it live. What are you really saying? To me, that's a very unfortunate choice of a location, because if I was in Anna Regina, or if I was in Charity, or I was in Maruka, or in Port Kaituma, in Matthews Ridge, in the Waini River, if I was in any of those places, my political leadership is safely in Georgetown expressing solidarity with me when they have provided absolutely nothing, not even by their symbolic gestures of holding the concert, by saying, come and hold the concert on the border with Venezuela. Make the resources available, that and fly the entire National Assembly there. I have little understanding of what is the benefit of holding a concert in the safety of Georgetown, where the people of Essequibo who are under threat can gain absolutely no sense of support from that activity.
You're
Um,
absolutely correct.
Nigel, you touched on threats and so on. One of the concerns I have, and I've shared this with some persons, and I would like to have your thoughts and Ricky thoughts on it, is that we know for sure the referendum will be held tomorrow. And from all indications, it will get the support of the people of Venezuela. Would the people, not the government of Venezuela, know I'm talking about, but the Venezuelan people, see this as a sort of green light to move into the Essequibo region, to basically occupy the Essequibo region? And of course, that will put tremendous strain on our services, our security services, our health services, education services. What are your thoughts there? Is this a likely scenario that over the next few weeks, few months, we see a real serious migration of Venezuelans into Essequibo region and maybe further in other regions?
I don't know if I could jump in there because I want to join you in that question to Ricky. First of all, that is precise. What you've articulated there is precisely what I anticipate is the most likely scenario, a soft invasion. A soft invasion in the remote parts of the borders between Guyana and Venezuela. You will see large numbers of Venezuelan, and if I was Venezuela, I would do this. I would send large numbers of women and children, especially pregnant mothers, um, to go and set up a territory somewhere and claim refugee status. So they immediately are seeking protection, but they're in large numbers. That means that the army can't physically go and shoot them
Right.
or repel them. It means that they're triggering protection on the various international treaties. And what then happens is the women go, you know, us men are exceedingly vulnerable. The Spanish girls would go, after a while, they stay there for a long time, they make children. That village will speak Spanish as the predominant language. And effectively, without moving the geographical border, the border has become invisible because this is now what happens. Now, that is, I think, a real possibility. I don't think the military is going to come. Now, when that happens, let's say they start drifting over the border, they go to Peruni in region, what's that, region 7.
Seven, seven.
Um, and they start doing this. The first question is, what is our response as a country? And since Ricky is probably part of the joint leadership between the government and the opposition, what is the plan? What is the plan to deal with that scenario? Second scenario, which is a little elevated and a little bit more serious. If some Guyanese soldier gets into an antagonistic engagement with one of these persons, and there is excessive use of violence or perceived excessive use of violence, and that incident is videotaped, it then goes viral. The Venezuelan military then
And
says that
calls for war.
the military of Ghana is now attacking Venezuelan female citizens, women in particular, and they have a picture of some heavily armed, GDF man and a Venezuelan woman on the ground or something like that. And the Venezuelan military then says, look, we are not invading the country. We are coming in to protect the Venezuelan citizenry who are now under attack from the Guyana military, and we have to protect our nationals. My question to Ricky and the government is, what is this? What are the
Yeah.
plans to deal with that? Because you're dealing with a very sophisticated country. Maduro has not remained in office after Chavez by accident. And therefore, these scenarios there needs to be a plan for them. And the citizenry, particularly those that reside in Essequibo that are on the threat, need to know what are the plans. If you wake up one night in Peruni, which is a small village, um, Aracuna people, and you suddenly discover that there are 1,500 Venezuelan people in your village, what do you do? Do you start a hostile engagement with them? If it's not a hostile, what is the plan? Do you accommodate them? Those are the issues which I was hoping that the collective leadership or collective political leadership could provide some guidance to the people who are in those affected regions. So over to you, Ricky.
Right.
Well, to the best of my knowledge, I haven't heard the government providing any sort of information on these discussions, any sort of strategy that would address such concerns. Ricky, I don't know
Yes.
if you would have
I
heard them on strategies.
I mean, Mr. Nigel has been really, it's a very, very, very important question for all Guyanese, and especially those in the Essequibo region. Um, I have not heard of any plan. Um, we have the formulations committee, the parliamentary committee. That is the foreign. That is the committee supposed to be dealing with these.
Formally.
These the combined opposition and the government be dealing with these questions and these issues. But I have not seen or heard of any of those plans. Um, you know,
But aren't you
how
part of the joint political leadership of the country addressing our national concerns?
right,
Nigel, this is
right.
not the
No,
one
no,
of the rare occasions when we would have had government and opposition working together. This
right,
is the rare occasion when there
yeah.
is a semblance
It is
of
an ample
government and
opportunity.
opposition being seen together, not necessarily working together.
Yeah.
And I
And
think
this is the difference.
that is the biggest problem we have in this country, which could take us another 2 hours to discuss. That there
Yeah.
is no real working together.
And
And as some
this is what
one
I was
guy
talking
said, there is this puppy show. There is no real strategy sitting around the table, bouncing ideas around, coming up with a plan, examining different scenarios, what's likely to happen, how do we respond. We're not aware of that.
Yeah,
At
well, you
least I'm
see,
not aware of that.
that is the issue that we are having. And into I want to put an angle as I'm not going to attempt to answer the question because I can't speak for the government as one because there's no joint plan to answer the question that you asked. Um, they just put we went to the National Assembly. We've made a lot of proposals to them. There was a motion that we supported. We sent several questions to the motions that we wanted to be done. They knocked off a couple of it. However, we still have to strap ourselves and go to the National Assembly because we have to unify on this national matter of national importance.
Yeah, but unquestionably, when it comes to Ghana sovereignty, the
Beverly, the people
coalition
here, and that's what this is
supported.
where I want to come around to Nigel's question. We have learned, we have learned that the government, through our regional level, our RMC's regional level, that the government were using the Prime Minister office in Region 7, an area called Imabadai or somewhere there,
Ramadan.
distributing ID cards. These people went to the National Assembly and passed the law to allow Tushos and persons to identify if this is Beverly here. I've known her for 10 years, but despite I didn't see you, I will sign your birth certificate form. They circumvent the law to suit themselves, and today, Mr. Nigel, is backfiring in them behind. So to answer your question, that's the reason why they can't come up with a plan up to now because it is backfiring on
But
them.
Ricky, it's not they can't come up with a plan. All of you got together and informed the nation in the National Assembly that you are coming together despite your historic differences, and that the people should be assuaged and persuaded that the collective leadership of the National Assembly was going to address the question. Now, I'm happy you raised that. So, Mr. Chavez and the military operatives in Venezuela, all they have to do now is find the two shows, bribe the two shows, and have the two shows issue those letters to several thousand Venezuelans. And you don't even need a military invasion.
That's
What is
right.
the plan, my friend? What is the plan?
And then following that, you can have a couple of municipalities, a couple of NDCs, a few NDCs, a few Amerindian villages under the control of persons loyal not to Guyana but to Venezuela. There is that real risk. So while even in Bell West Village here, where there is you looking for people to give birth certificates to, people are not approaching them. They're going. They have PPP has an operative there looking for persons, Spanish speaking persons, to
Right,
find out if they need a Guyana birth certificate.
yep, I
And
heard
so
that.
we have a runaway government just thinking about votes and not thinking about the long term impact of their actions.
I don't even
So
think it's long term.
that's
I
their
mean, it's
fact.
it's short term, isn't it?
Yeah, that is their fact. They're very short-sighted. They're very short-sighted on this issue. They're very short-sighted, and I said this over and over that they're very short-sighted, and that is the reason why they don't have a proper plan to answer your question. And that's why I put this point forward because
But it's
apparently
but
that
but
is
Ricky, if I could, it's
sure.
not they short sighted. You and them are one on this issue. I saw y'all in the National Assembly telling us, the poor citizenry, that you are now together and you are at one. You are speaking with one voice in relation to this common threat. And I have just, I believe, attempted to identify to you one of the things that will happen. If I am some person in the military in Venezuela, how much is it going to take me to bribe a two show to sign some papers to make a whole set of people citizens? So even though the intention might have been from the government for other purposes, you and the government and the rest of you in the National Assembly have said to us, don't worry. And my with this question to you, because y'all have y'all did your kumbaya and hug up each other and stuff. Well, how are you dealing with that?
So
How do you intend to deal with that scenario?
well, to be honest with you, I want to get quite clear. After the National Assembly, the government went about their program without involving the opposition inside.
And have you said that publicly? Have
And it is
you
and it
said
is
that
publicly.
publicly and collectively to the citizenry of this country, that despite us going to the National Assembly and saying to you, we are at one, we now have serious problems?
And we have said that. We have several press releases that we set out, especially coming from the leader of the opposition.
But Ricky, again, if
Yeah.
I am in Parima, how am I getting your press release? By what
Well,
means?
the, be-
The pigeon? It's flying by pigeon? How are I getting it?
there's a lot of the networking is going to the networking. There's a lot of networking that's
What that?
happening.
I can't
There
even
are
get
too many
internet.
gaps, Nigel. They're too, I mean, like the gaps are so wide that half the country can fall through.
Yeah.
And this is a matter of our sovereignty. You know,
Or former.
Essequibo is our richest region. And then when you look at the contiguous offshore resources, we're talking generally our survival as a nation. Our prosperity is tied up today. Offshore resources, it's tied up to gold and the forestry and all the resources within the Essequibo region. And we do not have a collective strategy because the government is of the opinion that somewhere along the line, somehow or the other, whatever they do is right. And they don't need anybody else other than as window dressing. And so they will go ahead with their program because they
Beverly,
won
can I
Guyana.
ask you a question?
Sure.
Are you in Parliament?
Yes, I am,
You're
Nigel.
part of the window dressing?
Sometimes I do feel like it. Honestly, sometimes I do feel like it.
So you're all dressed up with nowhere to go.
So we're there because we want the Guyanese people to know that we support initiatives to preserve Guyana's territorial integrity. We do not want to be accused of backpedaling or not going forward to support that. So we pledge our support. We're there to help. You're barely getting a peep through the window. You are not being invited to sit at the table for a real, meaningful discussion, solution finding, brainstorming. I think that is where the problem lies. And this is the history of the PPP, the general MO. Whatever they do, Honky dory, all right, perfectly done. They don't need anybody else. They elected opposition, the people they represent are of no consequence. They, the PPP, won Guyana, not ONE. Ricky, your thoughts?
or OWN.
That too.
Absolutely. I can't put it better than how you said it there. And I mean, I'm happy that Nigel is felting some questions too, because it's very important to know the positions, the way we are, and where the governments are. It brings out clearly as to, I mean, in terms of communication, I recall when we were in government, I mean, that's one of the questions he said, how would the person of the end region? We recalled that when Kathy was the Minister of Communication, we started a program to roll out the internet within these regions, and we have done it across 71 communities across those interland communities. And they started shut off the program. But people are still for somehow finding, through little smartphones and try to get a communication as much as possible. I was surprised at the borderline when Sherrod was there. The person said they were looking at our program in the ring and so on. At that end of the road, I can't remember exactly which one of the communities went on, but it was really to the end, and the people were actually leaving there. For some reason, they said, Mr. Nigel, the bush got ears, right? I'm a bushman. So sometimes, for some reasons, it get it, but it's not going to get as far as we expect it to get. I do hear the concern. It is the government um, uh, what shall I say? There's a government responsibility to ensure that the communication to these people there, ensure the communicate get to those people as effective as possible. And they are the ones who actually shut down many of the communication channel because they want to control, and they always want to control the people and the citizens of this country. And they're also using this uh, situation here as a political tool to gain their support also because I know we're going to go down a whole night on this if I continue on all the issues that we're getting with this government here. But I just wanted to deal with the Venezuela issue. I just want to tell our viewers here, that we have to stay calm as much as possible, and we have to ensure that the military invasion is happening, but the soft invasion and how we can deal with that, this will be up to the police force and the army to deal with those matters. And your rifle says, I was looking at a program called Unleash, where you know any mistake you make with the citizens of Venezuela can escalate into military war, especially if you don't treat them.
Thanks, Ricky. Nigel, as we prepare to wrap up, I think we've got just about 2 minutes more. Um, when is the ruling on the case, that the original case that we brought to the ICJ? And your thoughts on that?
No date has been set for that. I think they've given a provisional indication. It's probably going to be a year out, sometime at the end of 2024, maybe early 2025. I don't think we're going to get an early. Well, I don't think a ruling is coming before that time. So the short answer to your question is no date has been fixed for the delivery of the decision. Sorry, what was the second question?
No, your thoughts on how
Oh,
we have presented that
um,
case, the strength of it.
sure. One of the areas in which Guyana has been strong at a world class level, apart from producing a 15-year-old of the rum, rather rum, is we have always been strong in our foreign service. And that goes all the way back to Mr. Burnham's days because we understood that we don't have the military capability to address Venezuela. That's a given. And therefore, the requirement is that we have to have very strong diplomatic capacities.
Yeah.
And I do wish to compliment consistently whenever we have engaged the ICJ or any foreign bodies in relation to the preservation and protection of our rights, we have always had good, competent, across the board representation. We have had greats. We've had Retta Rashley Jackson, whether you think of Mr. Insanali, we have Mr. Greenwich now. Thank God we have Mr. Greenwich now. We've always had Fred Wills. We can go through the list. We've always had very strong and capable people. And therefore, it should be a reminder to us collectively as a nation. One, that foreign affairs is not a domestic political issue. Um, we know that we can't handle our domestic politics. We completely messed that up. But at least let us agree that in our foreign and external relations, we must always have the best and the brightest available from the country, whether they're in politics, out of politics, whether they're in your party or the opposing party. The one thing we ought to at least agree is that we have the best and the brightest, irrespective of who is in office. And so, having said that, in relation to our claim and the controversy that arose out of the 1966 Geneva Agreement, I am very cautiously optimistic that we will prevail. Absolutely. But I don't think the fact that we prevail and we get the declarations that we have sought in that case will necessarily put an end to, as Ricky said at the start of the program, the real global dynamics of what is happening. Venezuela is going to come back on stream. Understand that, whether under Maduro or under a subsequent government, Venezuela is going to come back into the international fold. When it does, Venezuela has infinitely more oil than Guyana. It has a population that's more than 24 times the size of Guyana. And therefore, in terms of global political influence, it is going to be more influential than Guyana. The large US investors in Venezuela are likely to be the same, or I should put it the other way, the large US investors in Guyana are likely to also have interest in Venezuela. And therefore, the question of how we deal with their interest in a competition for political space between Venezuela and Guyana in the petroleum world and in global affairs is going to become very important. If, God forbid, we ever have to defend our borders militarily and we invite a foreign military power to assist us, they don't come for free. They may demand many things. They may demand that they need a military presence in that area to protect their interests. We have to have a policy for it. I'm not saying that we don't have it, but all these things need to be planned out. There can't be an ad hoc
Yeah.
crisis basis approach. It has to be, again, some collective approach from the entire political electorate and the best and the brightest in the diaspora as to how we address this issue. Because I could see the foreign military power saying, yeah, we will come, we will protect you, we will guarantee your protection, but these are our demands. And if we only react to those demands when we get it and we don't have a long-term plan as to how we're going to deal with it and how it fits into our national development programs, we're going to be typical third world government, reacting, which is not the basis upon which you run a country. So my
Thank you,
thoughts on that
Nigel.
is that we should be a little bit more prospective in our thinking, and we certainly need to understand what it is that we are facing.
Thank
Absolutely.
you, Nigel. As always, legal luminary that you are, always in education when we have a discourse with you. Guys, I'm afraid that's the wrap for us. We're way beyond our time. But to our viewers, all I can say is stay woke.
That's right.
Thank you.
Take,
Thank you. Thank you.
good night. Good night.
Good night.